Do you think Russia is going to try to kick off another offensive from Belarus sometime in the next few months? Couple points of view on that subject. One from Radio Free Europe with some new satellite imagery that was published on November 8th, and the counter point of view on that topic from a Russian military blogger on Telegram published November 9th. So diving right in, Radio Free Europe, the article says new satellite imagery shows thousands of Russian troops may have returned to Belarus, raising questions about whether another incursion into Ukraine from the north is imminent, or if Moscow, with the help of Minsk, is merely trying to distract Kyiv. Mark Kansian from the Center for Strategic and International Studies said the Russians, quote, don't have enough combat power to launch an offensive from Belarus, and there are no vital Ukrainian points nearby. They probably want to distract Ukrainians and pull some of their forces away from Kherson and the Donbass. Now, the map on the screen here is from the first few days or weeks of the conflict, just showing that there were some avenues of attack by Russian forces through Belarus. There wouldn't be anything new. They mentioned a couple times the return of Russian troops to Belarus, which isn't entirely accurate. There have been Russian troops in Belarus long before the start of the war. The news would be that troop number is building and that there's more equipment coming in, which does appear to be the case. What that reasoning is kind of what's up for debate. So moving into some of the satellite imagery here, the map on the left that you'll see throughout the next few pictures here are the 4 locations where these images were taken. The southernmost location, for reference, is about 160 kilometers north of the Ukrainian border. What you'll see throughout a handful of these, like in the image on the right, are a series of tents set up. Analysts estimate that based off of the tents they can find in these staging areas, around 7,500 Russian troops could already be in Belarus. The numbers we've seen over the last few weeks and months is anywhere from 9,000 to 20,000, so 7,500 a little on the low side. Take it with a grain of salt. They continue that hundreds of pieces of military hardware, including trucks and some howitzers, have arrived at bases, according to the images. If you look at this map here, the pictures here, the one on the bottom right is from a week or so before the invasion. So these were troops and equipment staged, ready to push into Ukraine in coming days. The one on the top that does not have snow on it is taken from October, just in the last few weeks here. So you can see kind of a replenishment of many of those vehicles that went into the war in Ukraine. Continuing on, one of the major things we're going to see with any equipment moving into Belarus is traveling by railhead. So some pictures of a rail yard with military equipment coming on and off, or coming off of a train, and some that's already been unloaded. Kansian continues by saying it's plausible to believe that Russia needs the training areas, and more on that here in a second. Mobilizing 300,000 reservists doubles the size of the army, and it's not equipped to handle an expansion of that size. Sounds crazy. Russia's a pretty big country in terms of landmass, so I understand it seems like you just go out into the woods, find an open field, whatever, and you can get that training done, but there's a lot of infrastructure required to effectively train a fighting force, whether it's the appropriate area to fire howitzers, mortars, tanks, even small arms, down to the communications infrastructure needing to be in or around a railhead so you can quickly move equipment in and out. There's a lot that goes into that. And Mikhailo Zhurokov, a Ukrainian military expert, added to that, saying that Russia had sold off much of its land used as training grounds following the collapse of the Soviet Union. So those training grounds just might not be there. He says even as its armed forces underwent a major modernization over the past 15 years, Russia had not invested in updating its recruitment and mobilization infrastructure, analysts said. Not crazy. If you think about what that would be used for, mobilizing the country in the event of a large-scale war, I can understand how for any country at peace that falls down the ladder, the priority ladder, to where it doesn't get the most attention. So not crazy that Russia needs to move into Belarus to train some of their soldiers. That's one take on what we're seeing here. The last set of imagery we have here is from an airbase, possible MiG-31s, and in between some of them there's potentially some hypersonic missiles. But getting into whether or not this attack could actually materialize, Zhurokov continued saying it was possible Russia could order its troops into Belarus to invade Ukraine once their training finishes in the spring. If so, their fate could be far worse than the first wave of Russian soldiers who invaded from Belarus, who suffered heavy losses before retreating at the end of March. So that is really the we'll say, the NATO point of view for what we're seeing in Belarus. I'd say overall their view is that it might be a distraction. If nothing else, it's training. And these soldiers will be sent elsewhere, but not necessarily attacking from the north into Ukraine. But let's go ahead and take a look at the other point of view of the similar subject. This is not an official analysis, I guess I'll say. Alexei Sukhonkin is a Russian military blogger, so relatively tied in with the Russian military and what they're doing. This is a post he published on Telegram the morning of November 9th. I'm going to focus on the area that's highlighted on the right here. There's a lot here, kind of his analysis of where the war is and where it's headed. But the part highlighted actually gets into Belarus. That's what I'm going to talk about. This, as well as the article from Radio Free Europe, will both be linked in the description if you want to check them out. Anyways, he says, quote, "However, the most interesting direction remains the Belarusian one. Creating a strong strike force in this direction would be a manifestation of indecision to abandon the strike on Stry," which is the area on the map here, marked in red just south of Lviv. He continues, "As a result of which, it would be possible to cut off the armed forces of Ukraine from the supply of Western weapons. This, in fact, as I see it, could be the icing on the cake of the winter campaign." So what he's getting at is stopping the flow of aid and equipment and military supplies into Ukraine, and that's primarily coming from the west. The area they're looking at in Stry is about 200 miles from the Belarusian border. That's no small amount of territory in this conflict. That's about been the limit of advance for Russia in a lot of different situations. 200 miles is a long way. But he has the opinion that that's possible and that might be in the plans. So I don't know. I'm leaning a little bit more towards training ground, maybe a distraction. I mean, Ukraine has to keep an eye to the north as more and more Russian troops pour in there, but we'll see. Interested in your thoughts. Is Russia going to kick anything off from Belarus sometime in the coming months? Yes, no, maybe. But anyways, that's all we got for now. We'll see you all next time.